Iowa was recently graded a C and ranked 19th in overall quality of education by Education Week. Yes, that's the same Iowa that her dad told her used to be #1. And that's just one measure. There's many others. Some are good, some are not so good. And we're going to get into a little bit about how we measure and whether that perception about whether we really ever were first actually was the case. And I think we're going to talk a little bit about that today. But in talking to our panelists and looking at some of the data, it's clear that Iowa has lost its leadership position in education. I don't have to stand here and make the case for you to why it's important for business. Our future workforce, the economic development aspect of having a strong leading education system are both important for our business community. And right now, at the same time that we have our single biggest worry amongst employers is, am I going to have access to the skilled employees that can not only just do the job and have the skills, but are they going to have the critical thinking ability to solve problems and not just be the type of workers that went through a school system where they were checking boxes and answering multiple choice questions. And so, at the same time, we try to attract talent to the region, and that's one effort that we can do. But as any good sports fan knows, when you're growing your own talent from within your organization, not only is the talent going to end up being cheaper, but it's going to be higher quality. And I think that's the opportunity that we have to capitalize on as a state. At the same time, there's no hiding that we're having a funding debate in the legislature. And while I'm sure we're going to spend some time talking about that today, funding is far from the only challenge that we have facing education, nor is it the sole silver bullet to solve all the problems. So our goal today is to examine some of those nuanced challenges, talk about some of the efforts that our panelists are already involved in and are already working on with the business community, and then also talk about ways that the business community can align itself with the education system in order to help restore Iowa to that #1 position. And I know we've got the panelists here today to help us do that. With us today, we have Brian Wise, who's the Director of the Iowa Department of Education. We have Dave Wilkerson, who's the Superintendent of Waukee Community School District, and a co-chair along with Chris Littlefield on the human capital of the Des Moines Partnership's Capital Crossroads project. Waukee's been doing some innovative things with their school system aligning with business. We have Mark Jacobs. He's the founder of Reaching Higher Iowa, a recently formed nonprofit that's working to build awareness of the need for improvement in Iowa's public education system. And we have Mary Bontrager. She's the Executive Vice President of the Des Moines Partnership, and she's been working with the Iowa Business Council on a variety of efforts for skilled workers. Also, just a reminder before we kick things off with the first question, this is a Q&A. So after the first couple questions with the panelists, I'm going to be opening up for questions from the audience. So make sure to have those questions ready. So our first question today, we're going to talk a little bit about, as I alluded to earlier, some of the challenges that are facing Iowa's education system. So we'll start here with Ryan. What do you think one of the biggest challenges is facing Iowa's education system?
Well, first, thank you, Chris, for the opportunity to be a part of this great panel today, and thank you all for taking the time to engage in this conversation. So, as you mentioned, there are any number of challenges in Iowa facing our education system. I'll start with one, and I'm sure the other panelists will have some as well, but I think one of the things I think about a lot are the foundational skills that we need our students to have. And I think in particular, literacy and ensuring our students are effective readers early on. We know that literacy skills are foundational to being able to do more advanced work later on. And in Iowa, while there are so many great things happening every day in our school, we also have some challenges too. 1 in every 4 Iowa third graders are not reading proficiently by the end of 3rd grade. And that's a real challenge. If you think about when you fall behind early in school, it gets more and more difficult to catch up. So as a state, we're working very hard to ensure that there's effective literacy instruction in every single classroom. I think about this not only from my role as director of the department, but also as a parent. I have a 1st grade son and a 4th grade son, and they're in a very diverse urban schooling, Des Moines Public Schools. And 20% of their classmates are English language learners, 60% or so come from low socioeconomic status. And I think about the different challenges all of their classmates walk into school with every single day. And teachers are working incredibly hard to meet those needs, meet those challenges, and we need to continue to do more as a state to ensure kids early on have the foundational skills they need to be successful.
Dave?
Short guy. I need a tall chair. Obviously, there are a lot of challenges facing Iowa schools. And when Chris alluded to whether we were ever actually number one, and that came out of a conversation we had not too long ago about standardized test results. And that's where most of those rankings come from. And I would just urge all of you to remember that a standardized test, a bubble sheet test, doesn't necessarily measure the quality of the outcome of our schools. And those standardized tests, those NAEP tests, that the National Assessment of Educational Progress, quite frankly in Iowa we've never focused on. Our focus under the old No Child Left Behind legislation was on the Iowa assessments, which had no alignment with the NAEP tests and no alignment with our curriculum. So if we're not getting the results we thought we should be getting, it shouldn't be a surprise to anybody there. But also, before and you'll hear me say this again, we tend to paint every school district and every student with the same brush, and we need to recognize that we have some fantastic and some outstanding school districts in the state of Iowa. And we have some school districts that need some work. But in my mind, some of the biggest challenges we're going to face is the changing demographics in Iowa that we really haven't come to terms with. And Ryan alluded to that just a little bit. Our largest school system, Des Moines Public Schools, with 33,000 students, a third of their student population are English language learners. And back in the day, when Iowa was rated number one on those standardized tests, we were a lot more homogenous state than what we are right now. And we had, in my, at least, and I've been here my whole life, native Iowan. Sometimes I wonder, well, anyway. Why someone, I love Iowa, I'll never leave. The demographics of our state were much different then. And we had a middle class in our state, in our rural communities, that in many places doesn't exist today. I go back to my hometown over in eastern Iowa, where there used to be store after store, and all you have left in that town is a Casey's store and a couple of bars. And so that middle class is lacking, and the demographics are changing. And that's going to be a big challenge for us to figure out how we educate differently with those changing demographics to meet the needs of our business community. So I'll keep yakking.
All right. Well, first, Chris, thank you very much to the Business Record for putting this seminar on. It's an incredibly important one. Could I just see by a show of hands out in the audience, those of you that are educators? That's awesome. So, most important thing, thank you. Thank you for choosing the field of education. It is an incredible noble calling. I come from a family of educators, and I have profound respect for people that choose to go into that field. I always think when you're having a conversation about where you're trying to get to, it's important to understand where you start from. And I think you've heard some of the data slip to the middle of the pack. There's a lot of statistics you can look at. That middle of the pack statistic you hear about is a misleading statistic, because we still have, to Dave's point, we still have an easier demographic in the state-by-state comparisons. And if you look at how do Iowa students perform today across a consistent demographic, you're going to find us a lot lower in the rankings. We would be down at the bottom of the third quartile, top of the fourth quartile, depending on the test and depending on the year. One of the things I did, I've come out of the business world. I retired about 4 years ago. I tell people I'm failing retirement miserably now. But education is something I'm incredibly passionate about. I've gone out and done a bunch of research on the dozen or so states that have dramatically improved student outcomes. And the good news for all of us in this room is our challenge has been that our results have been stagnant. Our student achievement levels have been growing and growing very slowly, all the while other states have passed us by. But the good news for us is we have the opportunity to learn from those other states that have improved and say which of those ideas will work here in Iowa, and importantly, we can look and see which ideas have not worked. And so I think there's a couple key things, and I think the bottom line challenge we have in Iowa is the system, if you will, is the problem. We don't have an education system that leads to an education results that are going to continually improve. We got some incredibly talented people in the field of education, and we need to help design a system that's going to allow them to really shine and their results to be magnified across the state.
Mary?
Thank you, Chris. I couldn't agree with Ryan more on the early childhood literacy. We absolutely have to put these young people on the right start. We have a campaign going now called EDGE, 75 by 25, where by 2025 we want 75% of our working age population to have some post-secondary experience. We know the jobs will require that moving forward. And if they don't get off on that start, they'll never get into the pipeline to get to that post-secondary experience, so very critical. I would say one of the challenges we have moving forward and opportunities moving forward from a business perspective is ensuring that our students, that their curriculum and their experiences while they're still in the K-12 system has some relevancy, that they can understand the learning experience and how that will relate to their opportunities moving forward, their career opportunities, and their education pathways. So I think we have tremendous opportunities from the business community to be better partners with the education system and ensure that our students have these opportunities for career exploration. If you look at Gallup does a poll on student success, and they measure it by hope, engagement, and well-being. And Gallup would say that the single most indicator of student success are those three, but certainly hope. And hope comes from those young people being able to see themselves moving forward, that they have a future and that they're getting that preparation. It also comes from having adults surrounding them that are encouraging them. And so I would say where one place where Iowa does typically rank at the top or near the top is actually in these indicators in the Gallup polls. So I'd give a shout out to those Drake administrators and faculty that are in our schools and giving our students that hope for the future.